looking at the philosophy and thought and writing of Abraham Joshua Heschel, great American Jewish philosopher and teacher, whose 50th yahrzeit will be celebrated in December. And in celebration of that, I want to remind you again that on December 11th, you'll start to see flyers for this soon. On December 11th, here at the Shul. I thought it was at UCLA, but it's not. It's here at the Shul. Cantor Barron's Helfman Institute, collection of Jewish composers, has created a marvelous musical program incorporating the words and writing of Abraham Heschel. So come back on that Sunday night. We'll all drink wine, and we'll be the ones who really understand this stuff. No one else will. Sunday night, December 11th. Okay? Today we're doing the second episode. If you weren't here for the first episode, oh, you missed it. But here we got the second episode. Let me just have one so I can teach. Thanks so much. And
these assertive women.
no kidding. I'm used to assertive women. I live with one, raised one, and was raised by one. So anyone have a chance to get the book? You get the book? So you can start reading it. So the first third of the book is where we are today. You'll see some sections from the book. Because you got the more expensive version, the $30 version. The deluxe edition. It's true. It's a lot of money there, my boy. Yeah, please. Uh-huh. Yeah. Happy birthday. Yeah. Oh, Ian, you have that picture of the baby? All right, this is, got it up, can you get it up for me? That's Wonder. This is Heidi Carolyn, who is my granddaughter, who is the smartest, most beautiful, perfect child on earth. So whatever we say, that's Wonder. She lives in Phoenix, Arizona. She's 9 months old. She just got into school. True, right? Yale took her. She lives in Phoenix, so the East Valley JCC, where Mari recommended us. She wrote us a recommendation letter. Accepted her, and she's in the 2-day-a-week infant care program at the JCC, where she's learning calculus and organic chemistry so she can get into medical school next year. But that's Wonder. Yes, that's called. They're coming next week. They're coming next week on Tuesday, so that's why we don't have a session next week, because I'm going to be doing this. I play Saba while my kids go out to eat. So yes, exactly right. Well, that's what today is about. Today is about how Heschel sees the world and how Heschel teaches us to see the world. But let's begin something more personal than that, okay? I think one of the things you have to know about Heschel as you read him is that this is a profoundly lonely man. This is a man who, in his early years, is told that his whole family's been destroyed, whole family been murdered. His world, the world that nurtured him, the world that he came from, is gone. The whole world is gone. Ooh, it just got really loud. Are you okay? Okay. Hello. The whole world that knew him and he knows is gone. He finds himself in an America which is totally strange to him. He's a deeply religious man in a secular scientific culture that looks upon him as an irrational lunatic. It just doesn't understand why you do the things you do and why you deny yourself the things you deny yourself and what's wrong with you. And then even among the Jews he hangs out with, who you would think would understand him, the Jewish Theological Seminary where he teaches is a seminary taken with the scientific study of ancient texts. There's no religious education at JTS. There was no religious education when I was there. That is, my religious life, my belief in God, my sense of prayer, my answer to the question of why bad things happen to good people, we didn't talk about that. We talked about, you were there, we talked about the Ugaritic roots, the ancient Near Eastern linguistic roots of biblical words. We talked about how, can you just turn this down a little bit because it's awfully loud. Thanks so much. We talked about how the Talmud was composed. The closest we got to anything religious was to talk about how halachic decisions are handed down by rabbinic judges. But we never, I mean, for one thing, they never talk to us about, what do you believe, Rabbi? Never, not once in how many years? In 6, 7 years at JTS. And that's Heschel. And here's a man whose entire life is concerned with how you see the world and the dimensions of the holy that you can appropriate in your perception of the world. And they're just not interested in that. And then when he becomes on fire with this social activism, they think he's completely out of his mind. First of all, you're a Jew. What do you care about those people? And you live in New York. Why are you going to Alabama? And you're supposed to be writing monographs on obscure scholarly issues. Why are you marching in demonstrations and fighting against a war in Vietnam? And then in American synagogues, he wrote this amazing article. He gave his American speech article. He couldn't understand American synagogues at all. Right? Because you come into show, everyone's nicely dressed, it's very decorous, and we have something, remember, I don't know if you remember this, but responsive readings. True and certain it is that there is one God and there are none like unto him. It is he who redeemed us in the might of time. I mean, this is like, grant that we lie down in peace, secure in thy protecting love, and raise us up again. Or, I can't make too much fun of this because Hillel Silverman's in the shul, and it's his father who wrote that prayer book, Morris Silverman. But the idea of like, when do you cry? When do you laugh? When do you shout? Never. You never sing too loud. And he didn't understand us at all. And what was even worse is he knew that we didn't understand him. The most important philosopher and philosophy of post-war American Judaism was Mordechai Kaplan. Now, the irony is, Mordechai Kaplan and Heschel lived near each other on Riverside Drive. They walk to the seminary together in the morning. They're very cordial to each other. Kaplan was also something of an outcast at JTS, but Heschel was always his friend. Kaplan has an 80th birthday. Heschel is the keynote speaker. They go up to the 6th floor. Kaplan and Heschel had offices opposite each other. They close the door and write vicious things about each other. Not personally, because here was Kaplan. Kaplan made the audacious claim that modernity had changed everything, specifically science. What did we learn from science? That the laws of nature apply in all places, at all times, under all circumstances. Therefore, there's no such thing as the supernatural. And if you read in the Bible or any place else about miracles, revelations, prophets, any of this stuff, it's all irrational, superstitious claptrap. Push it away. Figure out what the ethical meaning of it is and give away the rest. And anyone who depended upon ecstatic religious experience was irrational, unscientific, unmodern, primitive. Sweep it away. I want a modern religion that any modern person can adopt. That's Kaplan, basically. That's Kaplan. I mean, and so you understand that for Kaplan, words like spirituality, mysticism, God are very foreign words. He uses God, but what he does, Kaplan is what's called a naturalist, which means everything in our world of common experience is all there is. So if you're going to have a God, you're going to have to tell me where God is in our world of common experience. And Kaplan does away with the idea that there's a God in the world. His idea of God is the fact that the world is moving, progressing toward a better and better state all the time. Great Beatles song like that. And you have to admit it's getting better. It's getting better all the time. And that's Kaplan. He called it the power that made for salvation. Heschel looks at this and says, what? That's wonderful. It's just not Judaism. I'll show you. Look, take the first page. This is from God in Search of Man, right? Look at the second paragraph. The central thought of Judaism is, this is his italics, not mine, the living God. It is the perspective from which all other issues are seen. That is a complete broadside against Kaplan. Now, you've got to understand, Kaplan was the dominant philosophy of post-war American Judaism. Those of you who came to this synagogue, you were spending time with Kaplan's greatest student, Harold M. Schulweis. right? Harold Kushner, Kaplan's great student. The whole country was. I was a kid growing up with a very religious rabbi who loved Heschel a lot, but spoke Kaplan. We never talked about God. I went to shul from the time I was like 6. We never talked about God. We talked about Israel, the Jewish people, Jewish education, intermarriage, the Jewish family. Never talked about God. Never. Never. Think about this for a minute. And by the way, just to give you a little hint that we're not so far from this, ladies and gentlemen, especially my dear friends who are on the leadership of the congregation, we interviewed 3 rabbis for my job. Did anyone ask them if they believe in God? We asked them, what do you believe about intermarried couples? Can they join the shul? Or how do you do fundraising? Or how should we get young people to join? Did anyone ever ask the guy, do you pray? You believe the Bible's true? Heschel starts with saying, great. Nothing wrong with peoplehood. Nothing wrong with Kaplan. It's just that it's like this much. It's 20% of Judaism. What's the central idea, the central thought of Judaism? The living God. It is the perspective from which all other issues are seen. And the supreme problem of any philosophy of Judaism, or rather any interpretation of Judaism, or any version of Judaism is, what are the grounds for man's believing in the realness of the living God? So this is Heschel's first philosophical task. I'm going to show you how a religious person sees the world. I'm going to show you the kind of situation a person finds themselves in which belief in God makes sense. It's not that belief in God, he's going to argue to us, is irrational, superstitious, unscientific, pre-modern. It's that modern scientific, quote-unquote, rational people have forgotten an entire dimension of their being. And they've left it behind. And in leaving it behind, they've left behind a critical element of being human. Happens to be the element that gives you a sense of the meaningfulness of life, which is why so many rational, scientific, unsuperstitious, modern people live with a ferocious sense of anomie, of no meaning in their lives. Why there's such a high rate of addiction, and such high rates of depression, and such high rates of unhappiness in the world's most affluent culture. Because you've left behind a critical element of your being, of being human. And me, Heschel, I'm going to show you what it looks like. Second thing I'm going to try to do, let's look at another line of this, right? Is man at all capable of discovering such grounds? Can we find out why people believe in God? Before attempting to deal with this problem, it is necessary to inquire, is it compatible with the spirit of Judaism to maintain that a man must seek an approach to God, that unless we seek God, we may fail to find him? Is there a way of developing sensitivity to God and attachment to his presence? Those are pretty good questions, right? I want you to understand, says Heschel, that biblical man, the people who wrote the Torah, were not crazy or primitive or irrational. They didn't have science, that's true. But what they were teaching us was a different way of knowing the world, a way that's terribly valuable to us. The grand premise of all religion is that man is able to surpass himself, that man who is part of this world may enter into relationship with God who is greater than the world, that man may lift up his mind and be attached to the absolute, that man who is conditioned by I hate guys who write this well, especially because it was his 12th language, who is conditioned by a multiplicity of factors, is capable of living with demands that are unconditional. How does one rise above the horizon of the mind? So what he's trying to say is, I want to show you, number one, I want to show you that religious people are not nuts, are not crazy, that the Bible is not written by irrational, superstitious, pre-modern, primitive people, but rather it is trying to show us a way of knowing the world. That's the first task. It's called phenomenology. We talked about this last week. It's a way of letting you see the world through somebody else's eyes. The second thing he's going to do is going to make this case that once we understand how a religious person sees the world, we can then go there ourselves. And we need to. We need to recover that part of ourselves, or we're going to leave a part of ourselves behind. And the third thing he's going to do is even more radical. Heschel looks out into the world that he lives in, this world which to him seems so strange. The first thing he sees, he looks back at his past and he looks across the ocean at Europe, and he sees the greatest act of human evil ever committed, and we were his victims. And he wonders, what kind of a mentality allows for Auschwitz? And then, if that were not bad enough, because you could make the case that was a one-time only, and that would make life a hell of a lot easier. But then, he looks at the American South, and what does he see? He sees the plight of African Americans in the American South of the 1950s. And boy, does it look familiar to a man who just lost his whole family in Auschwitz. And then he looks at what America does to Vietnam in the 1960s. And boy, doesn't it look familiar to what happened to his family in Europe. And then he looks around the world and he sees over and over again a repetition of this pattern. And what he comes to the conclusion is that it's the way we see the world that leads us to think that the human beings we encounter in the world are objects for our manipulation and exploitation, and not fellow souls living in the world. That it's the way we see the world. And therefore, he's going to make this radical case that religion is the remedy to a ferocious disease that has gripped human beings in modernity. A disease of exploitation, manipulation, objectification, dehumanization, and ultimately annihilation. And that unless we find a religious way to look at the world, we're not going to survive as a species. Because we'll keep doing this to ourselves until we finally do away with ourselves. So there's an ethical reason, and not just a religious reason, to change the way that we look at the world. And that's Heschel's case. And what we're going to have to discover ourselves as we read him is whether he makes the case strongly enough. I'm going to argue that he does number one very well, number two not at all, and number three is the most interesting of the set. But we'll take a look at that all together, shall we? Okay? Today I want to look at how Heschel sees the world. How does he see the world? How does a person like you and me, raised in a scientific, skeptical, modern culture, Kaplan had that much right, by the way, it was a good description of who we are, how do we reappropriate a sense of the living God? Well, he publishes this book in 1964. The same year he publishes God in Search of Man, he gives a paper to some big national conference on religion. And the paper's called Depth Theology. And he puts in that paper a summary of the task. Now, start with, remember, he's a man who takes language very seriously. What is depth theology? Well, anybody ever hear of the phrase depth psychology? Okay, Judy certainly knows this, and Gloria knows it. So psychology is the study of the mind. If you have a problem, let's suppose you're afraid of taking an airplane. You're afraid of flying. So you go to my brother. My brother has a PhD from UCLA in cognitive behavioral therapy, which means, and he used to give classes. This is how he made a living in graduate school. He would do Sunday afternoon classes on getting over your fear of flying. Made a lot of money, by the way. And what he would do is he takes you through some visualizations, take you through some relaxation techniques, take you through some self-talk, and by the end of 3 hours, you're on a United jet to London. You get over your fear of flying. You never discover why you have a fear of flying. You don't care. You got over it. That's what you wanted. Or you can go to a classically trained psychoanalyst for depth psychology. I had a lot of friends in New York doing this when I moved there. 5 days a week, an hour each time, $225 an hour for 25 years. And you will never lose your fear of flying, but you will find out why you're afraid of flying. What did your mother do to you that made you afraid of flying? Okay? Depth psychology is an education in self-knowledge so that you can understand from where it comes from. You won't necessarily get over it, but you'll know where it comes from. Depth theology is the same thing. So here's how it goes. Where is religion to be found, he writes. What sort of entity is it? What is its mode of being? One who is in search of art will find it in works of artists preserved, for example, in art collections. One who's in search of literature will find it in books preserved in libraries. But what's the place of religion? Do visible symbols preserved in temples, doctrines and dogmas contained in books, contain the totality of religion? It's actually a really interesting question. If I come to you and I say, I want to learn music, where would I go to learn music? Tell me. Where do I go to learn music? I want to appreciate music better. I've never been able to understand classical music or jazz. Where would I go to learn music? Tell me. You can go to a conservatory and take a class. You can go online now and take a class. You can go to one of these concerts where the conductor talks about the piece before they play it. You can talk to a musician who will tell you that's how you learn music, right? Then you go to a lot of concerts and you become adept at music. Okay, I want to learn art. Where do I go? You go to an art appreciation class. You go to a gallery, listen to gallery talks. You crawl around a museum for a couple of weeks. You learn art. I want to learn literature. I want to learn cooking. I want to learn gardening. You know where to go. Someone says, good, I want to learn religion. Where do you go? Well, I'll tell you where you go. I'll tell you where I went. I was in college, and I took Religious Studies 1. Guess what? We read all the books. Not all of them, but selections from the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran and the Confessions of Confucius and the autobiography of Thomas Merton. And then we took field trips. We went to the synagogue and the church and the ashram and the mosque and the meditation center. Then we met the practitioners. We met the rabbi. We met the minister. We met the priest. We met the imam. We met the guru. Then we witnessed the rites. We went to a synagogue service on a Shabbos. We went to a church service on a Sunday. We went to a mosque service on a Friday. We went to a meditation session. I did yoga for the one and only time in the world my Litvak body would let me do it. I still hurt. Then I took my test. What is the meaning of salvation in contemporary Protestantism? What is the importance of Israel for contemporary Jews? What is the meaning of jihad for Islam? And I got a B. Damn it. Do I know religion? Well, I know what the books say. I know what the rites look like. I practiced them once or twice. I know what the institution looks like. I met the imam. I met the what's missing? By the way, don't think this is just so funny. When I was in Hebrew school, anybody here go to Hebrew school? When I was in Hebrew school, I learned which order you put the Hanukkah candles in the menorah and which order you light them. To this day, I can't remember. I have to go find a 5-year-old. Which animals are kosher, which animals are not. We had to learn how to say the Shema real fast. Because my teacher, we had all these European teachers in those days, right? Boys, the one who is saying the Shema the fastest is getting recessed. The other to stay here, clean the room. Go! Shema Yisrael Echad. Baruch Shem. For my bar mitzvah, I was bar mitzvah, May 6, 1967, congregation Beth Kodesh. I learned my Haftorah. Halo kivene chushim atem li b'nei. Did I know anything? Do I know what it means? Now I do. Did they ever teach me what it meant? Did they ever teach me who was the guy that said those words? Did they ever teach me why? No, they just taught me how to pronounce them so my mother could be proud. And she was, because I did good. That's how we teach religion, right? What's missing? Well, no, not God. It's even better than that. Look, let's see what he says. What's missing? Do visible symbols as preserved in temples, doctrines and dogmas stuff you believe in, contained in books, contain the totality of religion? Now, the second paragraph remember, each paragraph is written separately on a card. Second paragraph modifies the first. Ready? And don't worry about the fancy language. I will translate for you. I promise you. Don't get lost, right? Hold hands with a partner. Religion has been reduced to institution, that's the place you go, or the affiliation you have. Symbol, that's the stuff we got. And theology, that's the ideas you got to memorize. It is the reduction of religion. does not affect or touch on or treat the pre-theological situation, the pre-symbolic depth of existence. I'll translate, don't get scared. To redirect the training, we must lay bare what is involved in religious existence. We must recover the situations which precede and correspond to theological formulations. We must recall the questions which religious doctrines are trying to answer, the antecedents of religious commitment. Now, this next paragraph says the same thing in easier language. To some, the truth of religion is ritual. Anybody here have an Aunt Stella who wants to know how frum you are? Right? I get measured all the time when I go do weddings or funerals for certain families, and they go, "You're a conservative, Rabbi?" Yeah, I went, "You're ordained." "Yes, JTS." "Do you drive on Shabbos?" "Not if I don't have to." "You keep kosher?" "Yeah, I keep kosher." "You eat dairy out?" "Well, yeah. In non-kosher." I had an aunt, my Aunt Sonia. She would always play this game of who's more frum. "Well, you know, your cousin is a Chabad rabbi, and he's really a rabbi, not like you." So one Hanukkah, I got my aunt a gift. You know what I got her? A frumometer. It's a box with a meter on it, and it has a probe. And you put the probe into a Jew, and it gives you a mathematical readout of just how observant and how frum they are. And you can say, look, Cousin Ronnie is actually, 10 points more frum than me. I guess he's a better rabbi than I am. Right? To some, it's how many mitzvahs you keep. What butcher shop you won't buy from. Right? To others, it's the essence of religion is dogma. What do you believe in? What is the essence? What are your tenets of faith? There is another component, however, which may be regarded as the vital ingredient. And yet, because of its imponderable nature, it often escapes the eye of the observer. It's that what goes on within the person. The innerness of religion, vague and often indescribable, it is the heart of religious existence. Ritual and myth, dogma and deed remain external unless there's a response from within the person, a moment of identification and penetration to make them internal. Okay? I was a counselor and then a Rosh Hashanah at Camp Ramah for many, many, many summers. Every morning at Camp Ramah, we had prayers. It was a kind of perfunctory thing because we were just teaching the kids how to say the prayers, right? So at one morning, I remember I stopped the service and I said, "This isn't fair. I'm not feeling it. Anybody here feeling it?" "No one's feeling it." "Close the books. Let's go to breakfast." And the kids all said, "What? We have to pray." I said, "Why? You're not praying. You're just reading words. In fact, you don't even know what the damn words mean. You're just reading the words." So the kids stopped and said, "Well, what's supposed to happen?" I said, "That's the question. That's the question. What happens inside a person? Or better yet, when he goes back to this pre-theological situation, take any species of religious expression and ask yourself, what happened to the person 15 minutes before that? What impelled somebody to write the 23rd Psalm? "Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil because you are with me." What impelled somebody to invent Shabbos candles or Hanukkah candles? What impelled people? What was the experience? Heschel is going to argue that there is a repertoire of human experiences that is shared by the way, and it's one of the radical pieces of his theology, it's shared by all human beings. And that those experiences are so transformational, so transforming, so powerful, that when we're finished with the experience, we don't want to let it go. So we create ways of bottling up and preserving the experience. At the end of a wedding, after he smashes the glass, I say to them, kiss each other. I'm going to make you do it 3 times, partly because I'm a hopeless romantic, and partly because I want the photographer to get lots of pictures, because that goes up on your wall. And it's one of those things you'll look at for the rest of your life, and you'll be back in that moment immediately. That's what great ritual does. It brings us back to a transformational moment. What happens if you look at a picture of a couple kissing and you don't feel anything? Either you're not connected to them or you haven't taken the time to go back to that experience. That's what we're doing when we're just mouthing the words and not feeling anything. And that's what Heschel, as a chassid, is so enraged about. You're doing the external without reaching the inside. And the reason why religion isn't working in this generation isn't because it's irrational or unscientific. It's because religion doesn't do what religion was supposed to do, which is bring us to that set of experiences which shake us and move us and change us. That experience. That picture is going to be on my desk for the rest of my life. Because someday this kid's going to be 16 and I'm not going to have the same feelings about her, because no one has the same feelings about a 16-year-old girl, right? Right? Oh, maybe you do. I don't know. Who has a 16-year-old grandchild? You have a 16-year-old grandchild yet? 15. Close enough. Yeah. But you'll always look back at that picture and go, oh, right? Religion, what we're missing in religion is not rationality. What we're missing is to try to get it on its own, get down to the level of its own experience. Now, there's a radical piece, there's two radical pieces of this. Number one, the radical piece of this is, therefore, no species of religious expression is legitimate unless we go back and reawaken the experience which it is attached to. That's a radical thing. And number two, all religions come from the same repertoire of experience. Notice he doesn't say Judaism here. There's nothing Jewish about this. He's talking about religion. In other words, all religions based on a common set of experiences. It's just that each religion is a different language for expressing that set of experiences. We light Shabbos candles. My Catholic friend across the street does something different, right? But the experience inside is the same. Because we're all dealing with life and death. We're all dealing with love. We're all dealing with loneliness. We're all dealing with want, with aspirations. And that's Heschel's radical philosophy. Now, one more paragraph. We do not have a word for the understanding of these moments, for the events which make up the secret history of religion. To convey these insights, we must use a language which is compatible with our sense of the ineffable. All right, I had to look that up, so don't feel bad. Ineffable means inexpressible. All of us have had experiences which were so wonderful, so profound, so powerful, we couldn't find words to express them. All of us have had that moment. So what words do we use to express them? Heschel says we have, each of us, a sense for ineffable experiences. Experiences that can't be brought into words. Experiences that can't be captured in concepts. Experiences which go beyond our normal rationality. Those are the experiences that lead us to an understanding of God in the world. But we don't have words for it, because by definition, it's ineffable. So what is he going to have to do? He's going to have to build a ladder, starting with ideas and experiences all of us have had, and build a ladder of new words to lead us to that place of understanding what it means to appropriate the world, to see the world with a sense of the ineffable. And that's Heschel's first task, building a new ladder, a new language of religious experience. Now, you'll notice in the way that he writes, each paragraph starts out with a concept, develops the concept, contrasts the concept with our normal ways of thinking, and ends with a verse from the Bible. Because what he's trying to do is to show us how the Bible sees the world. He's using the Bible as his case study of religious experience and consciousness. I imagine a Christian thinker could do it with his Bible, or a Muslim speaker could do it with his Bible. But Heschel wants to show us how our Bible sees the world. So the first word he's going to offer is this word, that was the one we did last time, wonder. And he says, wonder, and then he defines wonder as radical amazement. Now stop a second. Radical amazement? And the reason he uses the word radical, as you'll say in a minute, is that it's amazement at the very fact that we can have amazement. It's amazement squared, right? And wonder, what is wonder? Wonder is the oh wow moment. So for a moment, think of an oh wow moment. Think of a time that you felt oh wow, right? Wonder, radical amazement is the chief characteristic of a religious person's attitude toward history and nature. One attitude is alien to his spirit, taking things for granted, regarding events as the natural course of things. To find a cause for a phenomenon is no answer to his ultimate wonder. He knows that there are laws that regulate the course of natural processes. He is aware of the regularity and pattern of things. However, such knowledge fails to mitigate his perpetual surprise at the fact that there are facts at all. Now think of what he's telling you now. Mordecai Kaplan opens the first chapter of the Bible, and what does it tell him? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And Kaplan would say, primitive, pre-modern, unscientific mythology. Very charming, might even teach us some ethics, but don't take it too seriously. We know the real story of how the world comes to be, the Big Bang. Heschel says, wrong. Heschel says, science tells me how the world came to be. The Bible reflects the experience of looking up into the stars and saying, oh, wow, I am part of all of that. You ever sleep out under the stars in Girl Scout camp? Or in your backyard? You never did it in Girl Scout camp? No. You ever go to, that sense of looking up at the world and feeling that sense of, oh my God, of oh wow. Of oh wow. And what is so is amazing here is what's important is what I said last time. We talked about this last time. If I'd ask most people, like, what's the chief characteristic of a religious person's attitude? You'd say faith or belief or affiliation, or we would say identity today, religious identity. Heschel would say, all that's important. That's really important. But that's not the important part. You know what the important part is? To be the kind of person who walks around ready to say, look at that. Oh, wow. And the answer, and the opposite of religion is not secular or profane or skeptical or doubt. The opposite of religion is boredom. The opposite of religion is to walk the world and see nothing that is interesting. It's interesting. Nothing which grabs your attention. Nothing which you say, oh, wow. Right? I'm still the kind of person that likes to sit in a window seat on an airplane because I look down the whole way going, oh, wow. Cool. I wonder where we are. Look at that. I never realized that's what it looked like, you know. I just, there's people, you know, reading magazines and playing checkers or whatever they do on airplanes, and I'm just going, woo, little strange human being. But that's, religion is the cultivation of oh, wow moments. Because if you lose the capacity to say, oh, wow, well, put it this way. Heschel used to have a shtick. All of us speakers have a shtick. He'd start all of his lectures. He'd stand at the podium. He was a little guy. You saw him in the pictures last week, right? And he'd look out at the crowd and he'd go, ladies and gentlemen, a great miracle just happened. And people would stop, like silent, like, what happened? And he'd say, the sun just went down. And now the audience really thought he was nuts. And he knew it. But he'd start to talk about this idea of how a religious person sees the world. And by halfway through the talk, you realize that the fact the sun went down and none of us went to the window to see it means that something in us has died. What's died? What's died? A sense of the wonder and mystery and awe. Those are the words he uses of the whole world. And that this is a critical part of our being human. A critical part of our being human. Could you give me the Starry Night picture, please? Right? Early in the 20th century, there was a guy who resonated with this idea. This crazy man. His name is Vincent van Gogh, right? That's called Starry Night. Anyone ever seen a Van Gogh up close, personal, a real Van Gogh? There's a museum in Amsterdam. People wait hours and hours and hours in line to see. And what did Van Gogh paint? Did he paint Madonnas and Child? Did he paint great? No, he painted the most ordinary things in the world. the night sky. Do the next one, the flowers. How many people in life have painted flowers? Answer, everyone's kids. I still have them on my refrigerator door. Rafi painted flowers. Rafi's now 35 years old and running a tech company, right? But he was a great artist when he was 5, and he painted flowers, and I have it on my wall. Why do people wait hours and hours in line for an Amsterdam museum to see that? Because Van Gogh sees the world through special eyes. He sees in the ordinary events of life, levels of wonder that the rest of us overlook when we walk the world. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. And Heschel is saying, I want to reappropriate that sense because that is the basis of religion. That is more than the basis of religion. Because what he's going to argue is something quite remarkable. Now, let's go through this very carefully. You ready? I see the dog. I am the subject of the sentence, and the dog is the object. I see the dog. Right? Now, does the sentence change, or if I say, I know that dog, I know mathematics, I know the bus schedule. How about this sentence? I know Andy. Is that the same sentence? Is I know Andy the same as I know the dog, I know mathematics, I know the bus schedule? What's the difference? This is Buber now. Buber, who was Heschel's slightly older than Heschel and contemporary. Buber taught us that I know Andy is a very different phrase than I know the dog. I know the dog means I see that's my dog, or I see that's a poodle, or I know how that dog. But if I say I know Andy, there's a connection between me and my friend. We've been together for many, many years. We've been through good times and bad times together. I know him so well that if he acts strange, I'll say, gee, you're not yourself today. Think about that sentence. Isn't that a great sentence? You're not yourself today. Well, then who am I, right? Right? Because this, I know Andy is an intimacy. It changes it's not a subject-object. There's an intimacy there. Buber called that I-thou. Right? How about I know God? Is that more like I know the dog or more like I know Andy? And can you know God? What Heschel's going to say is the following. I know the dog is perfectly good for many of our transactions in the course of life. But you're never going to gain a sense of meaning of life by saying I know the dog. Living in a world where I am subject and the dog is object, I take that, what happens is I'm never going to be intimate. Only in a condition where I say, I know Andy, do I get a sense of what life is all about. Life is about building those intimate relationships and having a friend you can count on, and a friend who can count on me. And it's reciprocal. Because I know Andy, the reciprocal is Andy knows me. You can't have I know Andy without Andy knowing me. The IRS knows me, but I don't know them, right? And you know, you can't have it that way. Only if it's reciprocal. That's what Buber taught us. Now let's go one more step. In order to know God, you have to erase the whole subject-object altogether. Think of the name of the book again. God in Search of Man. Who's the subject? God. Who's the object? Us. The whole purpose of religion is not to know God. The whole purpose of religion is to get God to know me. And to realize that God wants to know me, or that God does know me. By the way, it's an interesting thing when you meet someone who says they know you, right? Yeah, and I mean, I do that because people know me. I'm the rabbi of the synagogue. Say, oh, you're the rabbi of the synagogue. I know you. Like, you don't even know anything about you. I know, you know, right? And someone says, oh, I dated your brother. I know you. I say, oh, no, you don't know me, brother. You're my brother, but you know, right? So, I mean, so listen to what Heschel, I want you to read that with that in mind. He's trying to undo and dismantle our normal way of thinking about knowing stuff, because he wants to teach us a new way to know. Watch. Mystery. Everybody see that? The deeper we search, the nearer we arrive at knowing we do not know. I know the dog. Really? What do you know about a dog? Right? What do we truly know about life and death, soul and society, about history and nature? Here's a phrase you can use in good cocktail party on Saturday night. Mystery is an ontological category. I want someone to please drop that into conversation this week. Would you please? What does he mean by that? Ontological means built into the universe. It's not that we just haven't found out enough about it yet. Someday we're going to send astronauts to Mars and find out all kinds of things about Mars. And we'll know more about Mars than we knew yesterday. We learned a lot about COVID in 1 year, so we built a vaccine for it. There are things we can know more about as we get to know them more about. But here we are, 10,000 years into human evolution, and what the hell do we know about ourselves? Can anybody explain the human personality? Can anybody explain love? Can anybody explain the self-sacrifice of a mother and father for a child? Can anybody explain the grief we suffer when we lose someone we care for? Can anybody explain the search for meaning? Can anybody explain any of this stuff? How many of you, don't answer this because I don't want you to get in trouble, have been married to someone and one morning you realize, I don't really know a whole lot about this person. Like, where did that come from? You ever have that experience with your spouse? Don't say it. I don't want to get you in trouble. Just think it. We all have that moment when we realize that there are depths of personality that we have never encountered before. Right? And sometimes they're really disturbing, and sometimes they're incredibly wonderful. You ever been in a circumstance where you're really in trouble, and somebody who is a complete stranger to you shows up and just makes it better? And you're like, where does this kindness come from? Where does altruism come from, right? My dear teacher, Rabbi Heschel, spent a career teaching us about Christian rescuers in the Holocaust, right? Because there's an oh wow experience to meet one of these people, and he met them. That's how he got to know them. He got Fritz Graeber was the first one he met. Schulweis was a rabbi in Oakland, California, and he was invited to a Federation dinner in San Francisco. I've been in many of these. And it was at the Fairmont Hotel, which was owned by Mr. Swig, who's a friend of his. And Ben Swig said to Rabbi Schulweis, I want you to meet somebody, come over here. And there was this very large German man in coveralls. And he said, this is Mr. Graeber, who's now the maintenance director of the hotel. And he said, Fritz, tell the rabbi what you did during the war. Fritz Graeber had a construction company with a major contract for the Nazis to build installations on the Eastern Front. Fritz Graeber was a German nationalist. He believed in Germany, not Nazis, Germany, the human side of Germany. And we saw what the Nazis did to the Lublin ghetto, much like Schindler. He got sickened by it. So he started hiring Jews. He started pulling Jews off of trains, pulling Jews out of concentration camps, pulling Jews out of the woodwork, put them on his construction crews. Anyone on Fritz Graeber's construction crew was immune from the Gestapo. The day the war ended, there were 5,500 Jewish people on his payroll. He went bankrupt because he didn't care about what it cost. He was saving lives. The Gestapo came after him. He walked across the lines and gave himself up to the Americans. The Americans put him in prison. And then 48 hours later, when all the Jews showed up and said, he's a hero, they made him a hero, gave him a visa, and brought him to America. He testified at the Nuremberg trials against the Nazis. And when he came to San Francisco, Ben Swig gave him a job as the maintenance director of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. And Rabbi Schulweis looked at this man and said, why did you do this? And Graeber said, what do you mean, why did I do it? You had to do it. Those people would have died otherwise. I mean, and that level of goodness in the world made Rabbi Schulweis, again, that's mystery, right? Now, the next one is awe. Anyone ever have an experience of awe? Well, you meet a survivor, a rescuer, that's what you feel. The beginning of awe is wonder, and the beginning of wisdom is awe. Awe is a way of being in rapport with the mystery of all reality. The awe that we sense, or ought to sense, when standing in the presence of a human being is a moment of intuition for the likeness of God. which is concealed in his essence. Right? Not only man, even inanimate things stand in relation to the creator. The secret of every being is the divine care and concern that are invested in it. Something sacred is at stake in every event. So he uses these words, wonder, mystery, and awe, to describe a different way to know the world. Now, please, you don't have to do this all day long. You go to the bank, cash the check. I don't want you to feel wonder, mystery, or awe. I just want you to get the damn check cashed, especially if you're ahead of me in line, right? But sometime in your day, you need to stop and say, oh, wow, look at this. Look at the world I live. Look at the life I live. Look at what I got. Look at who I am. Look at what's happened to me. And to that part of you is also part of you. And what Heschel is trying to tell us is that the loss of that part of us, this is all part of what he calls the sense of the ineffable, is a terrible loss of part of our being. And it's a different way to know the world. Because if I look at a tree or an ocean as a toolbox, as a resource, as something to be manipulated and exploited and used, I'm going to use it in a certain way. I'm going to respond in a certain way. I'm going to behave in a certain way. But if I look at a tree or an ocean or a person with a sense of the ineffable, then I'm going to treat them in a very different way. And what Heschel is trying to tell us on all three of these levels. Number one, this is where a sense of God in the world comes from. Number two, this is a path we ought to be taking. And number three, it's a path that if we lose it, we have lost a critical part of ourselves. So here's the moment of truth. Second page, top of the page, the question. The sense of wonder, awe, and mystery does not give us a knowledge of God. It only leads us to a place where the question of God becomes an inescapable concern. To a situation in which we discover that we can neither place our anxiety in a safe deposit of opinion, nor delegate to others the urgent task of answering ultimate questions. Wonder, mystery, and awe make us ask different kinds of questions than our normal rationality. Our normal rationality is, what time do I get off work? How much am I getting paid? Who's getting paid more than me? How can I get past this guy on the freeway? That's our normal rationality. Wonder, mystery, and awe, when you look into the eyes of your grandchild or your child or the starry night, makes you say, why is all this here? What is the meaning of my existence? What is my purpose in the world? And how do I live with this constant sense? And here's what he says, right? Religion begins with a consciousness that something is asked of us. Now, this is important. This is really important. It doesn't, following the world with wonder, mystery, and awe does not give you a nice new agey hug and says, oh, you're okay, you're just perfect. That's what we think it's going to do. It don't, says Heschel. At least not in the way he reads religion. What it does is it presents a question. What's your purpose here? And it's almost like the universe is asking us, all right, starry night, what's your purpose here? What's your place in all of this? Why are you here? Why are you here in this world? What are you meant to be doing with the little life, this life that you've been given in this world? And this is his remarkable thing. The ultimate question bursting in our souls is too startling, too heavily laden with unutterable wonder to be an academic question. It's not just a matter of academic theology. It's a personal question. It's you. It's asked in the second person singular. In the Bible, it's ayeka. Where are you? Right? To be equally suspended between yes and no. We can no longer ask, is there a God? In humility and contrition, we realize the presumption of such asking. The more we meditate, the more we realize that the question we ask is a question we are being asked. Man's question about God is God's question about man. Now, what does that mean? Appropriating the world with a sense of wonder and mystery and awe. Holding a grandchild, walking the floor of a forest, standing by the ocean, recovering from a terrible disease, right? Standing with a friend who just recovered from a terrible disease. You have a different sense of how life is. And Heschel says at that moment, it's not a sense of, oh, glory, everything is perfect. On the contrary, there's a question being asked you. Now, what's the question? And how do you answer the question? That's what religion comes to figure out. That's what religion comes to figure out. So we started this by saying, if you look at the very first line, I gave it back to you here, religion is an answer to man's ultimate questions. We thought that the ultimate question is there a God? And religion comes to answer that question. It might be. But Heschel just played a trick on us. He said, no, the question isn't our question to God, to the universe. The question is God's question to you, right? What are you doing in the world, Feinstein? I gave you a life. I gave you these resources. What are you doing with it? And religion is my way of answering the question. Religion helps me clarify the question and figure out what my answer is going to be. Every one of us is being asked the question, why are you here in the world? What are you doing with your life in the world? Right? Heschel once wrote, religion isn't about, Religion is about getting out of life all you can get. Religion is life getting out of you all you can give. What are you prepared to give? Because here's his idea. We can't know anything about God except one thing. Look at number 8. The Bible tells us nothing about God himself. All its sayings refer to his relations to man. His own life and essence are neither told nor disclosed. We hear of no reflexive concern. That's God not caring about God. And I care about me, like you care about you, but God doesn't have to care about God, because that's the fun of being God, you see. Of no passions except a passion for justice. Right? The only events in the life of God the Bible knows are acts done for the sake of us, for man. Acts of creation, redemption, or revelation. Divine concern means God taking an interest in the fate of man. The only thing we can say about God is God cares. That's the whole truth of the Bible in one sentence. God cares. Now, what does that mean if God cares? If God cares, then that's what's being asked of us. Because every time we care, we then imitate God. Or as my teacher would say, we act in a godly manner. And caring is that element of us, because think about what caring is, right? You can care for yourself. You can care for your own. Or you can care for the world. And the broader your circle of caring, the more divine, the more godly you become. That's the whole purpose of the tradition, of the Jewish tradition. That's the whole element of the Jewish tradition. Abraham is called out of his anonymity and told, hey, Abraha, go be a blessing. Care for the world. And that is Heschel's notion of what we're going to discover about God. So if we go back over those 3 tasks again, number 1, he shows us how a religious person appropriates the world. A religious person appropriates the world with a sense of wonder, an awareness of mystery, and a sensation of awe. And because it's so easy to forget that and revert back into my waiting in line at the bank thinking, the tradition gives us a set of reminders and a set of exercises, training us to constantly reawaken a sense of wonder. You all know this. You just don't know you know this. That's what a bracha is. According to the Jewish tradition, we're supposed to say 100 brachot a day. That's a lot of brachot, right? But think about what a bracha is. All right, take the words, first of all. Ready? Baruch atah Adonai. What does Baruch mean? Blessed, praise. I want to give you a better answer. Ready? Every Hebrew word is based on a 3-letter root. The 3-letter word of the root of the word Baruch is Bet Resh Chaf. Berech. In Hebrew, Berech is your knee. Verb of knee is to kneel. When do we kneel? Catholics kneel during worship. We Jews, not so much. But there are some times in life when you kneel. willingly. When do you kneel? When do we kneel? Anybody kneel to propose marriage? At least in romantic novels they do. I don't know, romantic movies they do. Why does a man kneel in front of a woman to ask her to marry him? It's not subservience, because they're not quite are you subservient to? I guess you will. Okay, never mind. Well, aw's a good word. It's to say, you fill my universe. It's to look from down up, right? The other time you kneel, by the way, when you have we're just doing this now. When you have a baby in your house, you have to child-proof the house. And the way you do it is you get on the floor and you crawl every square foot of the house and put things in all the plugs, which is kind of an interesting thing. You get a sense of what it's like to be a baby, a kid, and look up at the world. You are standing, you are acknowledging something that is greater than yourself, something to which you are not, it's not fear, it's partly out of love and reverence and just an acknowledgement. Baruch, I acknowledge Atah, you God, Eloheinu melech haolam, whose presence fills all of time and space. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who is revealed to me in this bagel. William Blake, the great English poet, wrote that the whole world in a grain of sand, right? The physicists then came away along and say, yeah, they're actually exactly right, you know? But poetically what he meant was that if you really paid attention to that grain of sand, it's so filled with wonder that it exists at all that you begin to understand how the whole universe works. So in this case, when I look at a bagel and I say, it is a miracle that I have what to eat, that there's a congruence between my physiology and the world's nutrients, that there's resources to support my being in the world, that there's a whole world that created this bagel for me. There's all of this wonder. And what the bracha makes you do is stop and look at it and say, oh, wow, a bagel. Or, oh, wow, a sunset. Or, oh, wow, a glass of water. And then there's a bracha, which is the mother of all brachot, which is shechianu, which is nothing in particular, just this moment. The bracha is a wonder statement to rekindle wonder, because we keep slipping out of it back into the world of, not oh wow, but oy vey, And to get you out of oy vey and back to oh wow is what you have brachot for. So Heschel's showing us how a religious person sees the world. And it allows us to follow him on that pathway. That I think he does very, very well. The next thing, I'm not sure, I don't think he does well, which he's inviting us, because there's a big gap between oh wow and I believe in God. And that gap is hard. He can't take us there. He can only point to it. And I don't know if he's successful at that. If you were already a religiously oriented person, if you already had a sense of this in your heart, then you're easily followed, because this describes how you look at the world. He does a great job of describing. When he prescribes, when he pushes us in a direction, I'm not sure that he's successful. I don't think he's successful. Because I keep having these questions, like, really, And then the third thing, which I think is the most intriguing of the three of them, which is, if we don't change the way that we look at the world, we will destroy ourselves. Because it's that subject-object. Here's the phrase, epistemology is ethics. Epistemology means the way we look at the world. It's my attitude of how I look at the world. And how I look at the world is objects. Me and the dog. Me and the wall. Me and the table. I see the chair. I see the wall. I see the table. Then if I put a human being in that same sentence, that person becomes objectified. And our capacity to objectify a human being and not to realize the infinite preciousness of a human being, not to realize that the human being is not the surface we perceive, but a deep inner sense, a soul, is what ends up giving you all of these atrocities of dehumanization that we've come to experience. How is it that this kid goes into a high school with a high-powered rifle and blows away so many classmates? and doesn't see them as human beings? How is it that a police officer leans on a man's throat as he's screaming and begging for breath and doesn't see him as a human being? I mean, that's what Heschel's trying to figure out. And he traces it back to this way that we see. Because if you'd stop seeing things as objects and begin to appropriate them as wonder and see the wonder in them, then you wouldn't treat them in the same way. And that's what and the ethical part of Heschel, I think, is very, very compelling. At least to me, it's very, very compelling. All right, let's stop. That was an awful lot. Can you breathe? Everybody breathe? All right, talk to me. What do you think? Please.
What did he say about artists?
He loved music. He didn't say much about art, but he loved music. Well, he actually studied aesthetics in college. So he did have a lot to say about that. You'll see he'll talk about beauty later. But music was his. First of all, Sylvia, his wife, was a concert pianist. And I think that was one of the things that connected him. He was deeply, deeply moved by music. And he's a chassid. So for chassid, you don't need words to pray, you just need a melody. Right? Because time for him is a very important category. And music is a category of time. It's an expression of time. So art, in some ways, was moving to him, but really, it was music that really moved him. Okay? That's what moved him a lot. Okay? What else? What's the question? Yes, please.
On the practical religious people in New York.
I can't hear you.
What was his view on people like who were, in Brooklyn, you have all the Hasids, and you look at them and they like machines go in the morning to the shul, like a schedule. And this is totally against what his view would be.
That's a really good question. So the question is, how did he view the sort of contemporary expressions of Hasidism, which is a species of ultra-Orthodox Judaism, species of ultra-Orthodox. He had a few cousins who survived the war. One of his cousins is a big-time Brooklyn Rebbe. He actually has a cousin named Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is a big Hasidic Rebbe. So he had cousins. What happened, this is a long story, and someday I'll tell you the whole story, but Polish Hasidism, the Hasidism he grew up with, was much more worldly, much more creative, much more rebellious than what we know now. It was much more open-minded. It was much less afraid of the modern world. It was only after the not only, but more so after the Second World War, that Hasidism looked out at the world beyond its boundaries and was afraid of that world and drew in upon itself and built boundaries and borders. So if you go to Williamsburg, Brooklyn, they don't want to talk to you. They don't want to talk to me. Hell, they don't want to talk to Chabad rabbis. I mean, they are so insular because they're so afraid of that outside world. For them, the outside world is poisonous. It's absolute poisonous. And they've become so pedantic in their religious life, observant to an extreme level in their religious life, because they want to protect themselves from what they perceive is the pernicious poison of modern life, of the modern world. And so Heschel looks at this as a classic Chassid would and sees that is a terrible travesty. There too, you are worshiping the forms of religion instead of worshiping the God who gave it, was supposed to lead to it. You're worshiping the forms. If you could, there's this horrifying story a couple of years ago in Israel of a little girl. She was an Orthodox kid, and she was walking in a neighborhood in Beit Shemesh, and these more Orthodox guys started attacking her because they didn't like the way she was dressed, which sounds awfully like the Iranian situation, right? And like, you're hurting a child? You're hurting a child because your standards of what? Of sneas? So he had a real hard time with that. He called it religious behaviorism. the worship of the form and the forgetting the essence of it. Now, he would never explicitly condemn that world, because that was the only connection he had left with the world he came from. But in his private stuff and in some of his writings, you can read easily between the lines how disappointed he was in those forms of religion. You know, we meet Hasidism here in LA principally through our Chabad brothers and sisters. Chabad is an aberration. Chabad is not normal Hasidism. Satmar is normal Hasidism. Belz is normal Hasidism. You know, Ger is, these are the big Hasidic communities that you don't see here in LA. First of all, they don't live in LA. They live in Brooklyn and they live in Israel and in Antwerp, right? And second of all, you won't see them because they won't let you in their world. They won't let you in there. If they do, they'll have, like, because you're a tourist. You can visit the Belz synagogue in Jerusalem. Quite a place to visit. You ever drive up to Jerusalem, off to the left, up on the hill, is a building that looks like what you've seen the ancient temple looked like. It's the biggest synagogue in the world, the Belz synagogue in Jerusalem. It's an unbelievable synagogue, right? Huge sanctuary, the biggest ark in the world, right? They have a few dollars, these guys. Right? And, they run all the diamonds in Antwerp. And there's 10 floors below the sanctuary. 5 of them are social halls, and 5 of them are yeshivas. 5 levels of yeshiva, and then 5 social halls. And they're booked morning till night doing weddings. And they have an interesting custom, Mr. President of the synagogue. You ready for this? They have a wedding package for everybody. We don't care how rich you are, how poor you are, how close you are to you have to be a member of the community of Belz to have a wedding there, but whoever you are, you're getting the same chicken. You just tell them how many people you want it for, and they arrange it for it. Same flowers, same dress, same, you know, not a bad idea when you think about it, right? And they're booked from morning till night, because there's all these, Belz is the biggest. It's an argument between Belz and Satmar, who's the biggest, and there's a lot of overlap, because their kids intermarry with each other. Different kind of Hasidic world than these guys. And then Heschel, Chabad is a different Hasidic world altogether, because Chabad is outwardly looking. The missionary activity of Chabad, to talk to people like me, is their mission, but they're looked down on by all these other Hasidim. They're not frum enough. No, I'm not kidding. They won't eat they're angry at each other. Heschel found all of that bewildering. Yeah, this craziness. But the question, see, his question is, but I'm more interested in his question to me and to us than his question to them. The question to us is, what's missing? And the answer is, you got the forms down, you just forgot the content. You have the external performance of the ritual perfect. Are you making time, place? Thunder? Are you helping people find the inner experience? The inner experience. And that's what's so interesting. Now, my mother, some of you remember my mother. My mother, who was a Hashemer Hatzir kibbutznik, every Friday night of my life, till she died, put a shmata over her head, lit 4 Shabbos candles, and prayed. And when I was a kid, I used to give her a hard time. I said, Mama, you don't believe in God. Who are you praying to? Yeah, I mean, but she had, and it was her experience, and she was fervent in this. And then one summer I went to Israel, and I worked on the kibbutz. My parents founded a kibbutz in Israel. And my kibbutz mother, Batya, who was also a Hashem Eretz Zayir, radical communist, socialist, atheist Jew, put a shmata over her head and lit Shabbos candles. And then she and her husband, Aaron, walked me to the Chadarochel, to the dining hall, for Friday night dinner. And I'm walking down the street, the main thoroughfare of the kibbutz, and I notice that in every apartment, the kibbutz ladies are putting a shmata over their head. Now, what does that mean? That means the inner experience of communion with God, in however language you want, is so powerful to my mother, to Batya, to the women on this kibbutz, that even their expressed atheism couldn't stomp it out. Couldn't stomp it out. This was their religious experience. Go figure, right? And look, we all have these. I was once, one of the beautiful things about belonging to this shul is people are so generous. So someone invited me, I remember who it was, someone who had a really, really, really good box at the Hollywood Bowl, invited me one summer, Nina and me, to go with them to the Hollywood Bowl. And the Hollywood Bowl in the summertime is the most civilized thing you can do in the city of Los Angeles. And it happened to be Yo-Yo Ma playing the cello. I now know what davening looks like. This man, this was such a thing to watch. Anyone ever watch him? You ever see? But I was like 4 rows from the front, like, so I could see like into his eyes. So, you know, the orchestra's there, and they introduce him, and he comes out, and the crowd goes nuts, right? And he comes out, and there's this big smile on his face. He just loves this. And he brings out this cello, and he opens it up, and he puts it down, and he sits down, and he looks at the conductor, and he nods his head, and the conductor starts the piece, and the man closes his eyes, and then it's not Yo-Yo Ma playing the cello. It's the cello playing Yo-Yo Ma. Because it was like he was one with this music, and it's this big beatific smile on his face. The music is flowing through this man. And I looked at it and I said, now I have seen true prayer. True davening. My mother's Shabbos candles and Yo-Yo Ma playing this beautiful piece of music. And then, you know, the music finishes, and that's when he opens his eyes, and he puts down the bow. And I'm sure if you asked him, you know, in the third movement there was that trick between he wouldn't know what you're talking about. Because he wasn't thinking about the music. He wasn't thinking about playing it. He wasn't thinking about his bowing. He was just the music. Right? That's what Heschel's talking about. That's the inner experience. Get it? So it's a wonderful question, George. Thanks. All right, lots. Arnie, please. Rabbi.
I have no problem with Judaism.
I'm so glad.
Let me finish. But I have a big problem with our colleagues.
Okay.
I have a problem because so many of them who I have a chance to ask this question to don't believe in God.
Yeah.
And they tell you that.
Yeah.
And they probably told you that too.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
I don't know how they daven. I don't know how they interact. I don't know what they say when they're sitting in synagogue.
Yeah.
Because I have a whole different experience.
Yeah.
Maybe because I was raised like in an Orthodox family and I went to shul twice a day. But I think I really felt it when I was in the Army. And in Vietnam, I was a medic, and I took care of people who were on the verge of dying and who died. And I would sit down with a body waiting for the waiting for the grave people to come to get the body. And I felt a connection with the body, and I felt a connection that God was there with this person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had this I feel a real feeling of God.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
I see rabbis who just vapid when it comes to have experience of God.
Yeah. All right, so lest anybody think that I call him Arnie because he's my friend, but this is Rabbi Arnold Stiebel, who's a member of our shul for a long time now and a dear friend. So we're talking inside the park baseball, if that's okay. And I think you're right. I think you're right. First of all, I can point to my generation's not much better than yours, but it's a little bit. Your generation, you're a little older than me. There's a lot of guys that went to seminary, get out of Vietnam, you know, so they weren't really interested in doing rabbiing. They had other motives. And then there are a lot of people just sort of, it's the only thing they know how to do, you know. They were, and then there are a few whose souls are on fire, as Heschel would say, or as Elie Wiesel would say. And, you know, so don't condemn those who are that way, but find the ones whose souls are on fire. Find the ones who really have. I spent 30 years with Harold Schulweis. Many people would say he's an atheist. I don't think so. I think he's one of the most religious men I ever met. Of course, his ideas about God, but his emotions, his feelings about God, his experiences, the depth theology of Schulweis is quite profound. Because no man would do what he would work as hard as he worked to teach Torah, to work for justice in the world, to find an idiom, a way to speak to a generation, if there wasn't something deep inside him that was connected to the ultimate, connected to the living God. Now, he would always deny that there's a living God, but I happen to know better. That's what I wrote in my book when I wrote his biography, is that godliness there is a deep religiosity to godliness that you might miss if you just read it as superficially. And that's really my experience of Rabbi Schulweis. This was a deeply religious man. Well, it really is. I mean, because this, I watched him. I watched him 30 years I watched him. Deeply, deeply motivated, because there are no other motivations for this except a profound sense of what Heschel talks about, ultimate questions, being asked an ultimate question, and fashioning your life as the answer to an ultimate question. And the ultimate question is something like, what are you doing in the world, man? And the answer is, well, here's what I'm doing. Right? Yeah. Well, I'm not sure Heschel did either, by the way. Remember, this is 50 years after he's gone. He's the greatest rabbi in the world now, 50 years after he's dead. Nobody in the Jewish world, you remember JTS, they thought he was, there was no, I think Lieberman, they didn't think anything of him. They didn't understand him. And his students were all these outcast guys, Art Green, and Dresner and these guys. I mean, they just, nobody got him. Now, he's Heschel. No, he's Saint Heschel, actually. But then he was very much an outcast in the Jewish world. Now the world's sort of catching up to him. That's why I wanted to teach this stuff, because I wanted to go back and read it again. So, thanks. I appreciate your confession there. I'll give you absolution, brother. No. On the contrary. You did. I mean, don't say that. I know communities that you touched. Don't say that. All right, Scott, how you doing?
Good. So one of the things you spoke about at the beginning was the difference between Heschel and Kaplan.
Yeah.
And also, Rabbi Schulweis. But when you have that he made the statement, faith in God is a response to God's question, isn't that sort of Kaplan-like in that what we do inside for God is...
You're going to end up in a place which is not too far away, which is, if God is asking me a question, my life is the answer. Yeah. So that ends up in a place close to Schulweis's notion of, not Kaplan, but Schulweis's notion of godliness. God as a verb, right? Or Jewing as a verb. And that ends up, because if the ultimate question is, what are you doing in the world, and your life is the answer, then yes, you end up in that kind of a place. But what Heschel's asking us to do is something very difficult. He's asking us to acknowledge that there are experiences that we have but can't describe. The fancy word for this is preconceptual, pre-linguistic insight. A big controversy in philosophy about whether this is possible. But Heschel's saying we all have those experiences all the time. Really simple. Try explaining to me what a chocolate milkshake tastes like. Go ahead, try it. But the idea is that we all have these experiences, and Heschel's saying that when you appropriate real powerful experiences like this, you come to understand the dimensions of your own existence as much wider, as much bigger. And he says you come to understand that the universe, or God, is asking you a question. That phrase, man's question about God, is God's question to man. My question of, is there a God in the universe? Is there meaning beyond the absurdity of the world? Is something going on that's leading us to something valuable, better, more precious? Is the world's question back to me is, yeah, what are you doing about it? How are you doing that? And that's a very Schulweisian move. Schulweisian, is that a good word? That's a very move that the rabbi would be very proud of, right? That's a move that we'd be proud of, because it's reflexive in that sense. Man's question to God is God's question to man. Or man's question about God is God's question to man. Right? You're looking for meaning. What are you doing in your life to find meaning? I mean, that's sort of, so in that sense, that's where they come very close to each other. Schulweis rejected Heschel when he was a young student because Schulweis was thoroughly Kaplanian and very rationalist. Over the years, he mellowed. First of all, he had a heart attack. Then he had a second heart attack. Then he had a third heart attack. After the third heart attack, he started writing poetry. Because what's poetry? Poetry is what you write when you have ineffable experiences. When you can't find discursive sentence language to describe what's happening to you in the world, you start writing poetry. And he became much more sensitive to this kind of stuff and much more open to this kind of stuff. It's about the same time, by the way, that he had grandchildren. And he started enjoying having children in shul. Because for the longest time, you didn't dare bring a child into Harold Schulweis's sanctuary. I mean, literally, it said it on the high holiday tickets, children are not allowed. I remember the first time I led a service here, and there were these kids there, and I said, come out, wherever you are, you know? And I had them stand with me on the beam and the shofar blowing, and afterwards somebody came and spoke to me, right? One of your members came and spoke to me and said, I thought children weren't allowed in the sanctuary, right? And I said, I don't have a ticket. I don't know what it said, you know? So, anyway, Rabbi Schulweis mellowed. And in his mellowing, he began to accept parts of himself that didn't accept before, like his emotions and his fears and his feelings. And then Heschel became very important to him. He really resonated. I mean, he's never not Kaplan, and he was never all Heschel, but Heschel began to speak to parts of his existence. Yes, please, Sherry.
So it sounds like Heschel believed that the internals had to come first. But did he discount the possibility of the externals? Like
No, it's not that the internal comes first. It's not a question of priority first, second, third. It's because you can start with the external. Most of us do, right? In the 12 steps, they say, act, fake it till you make it, right? You act it till your acting brings out your thinking, and not the right acting brings right thinking, not the other way around. And frankly, in life, it's pretty much that way most of the time. Right? We believe what we do more than we do what we believe. And so if you want to change somebody, you change the way they act, and slowly they'll change their attitudes. Very hard to do it the other way around. Okay? So here, what you got to do, he'd accept that. What he's angry about is what George mentioned before, is people who are so committed to the external behavior, the forms, without the internal feelings, without the internal experience, the insight, the wisdom. It's not feelings entirely. It's insight. It's knowing the world. It's experiencing these things, right? It's saying the prayer without feeling what the prayer is supposed to say to you. Again, Arnie, how many times services and you're like going through the service, and it's like you're just like going through the motions of the thing, right? Or what's even worse is high holidays. Something wrong? Everything okay? We okay? Oh, good. I'll be right there. So high holidays are the worst, right? Because we have this it's the ineffable. So why do we have an 800-page prayer book? If it's ineffable, what do you need? What is 800 pages of prayer for? So, 2 pages, 3 pages, 20 pages. 800-page prayer book, And now we will pray. Turn to page 672 and look. Right? And it's just too much. So we get so committed. Me? Oh, I actually do, but not in shul. Can I confess that? I can't. In shul, it's hard for me. I like being in shul, as a Jew, by the way, not just as the rabbi. I like being in shul. My father loved being in shul. You know why my father loved being in shul? Because that's where Jews are. He likes shul because, like, the same reason Bugsy Siegel liked banks, right? Right? Because that's where the Jews are. My dad likes to schmooze with Jews. He likes to schmooze with Jews. He feels comfortable in a room full of Jews. So he comes and he schmoozes and he falls asleep, you know? It's my dad doesn't shul. And he loves it and he schmoozes with Jews. And I like to schmooze Jews too. But if I really want to pray, I need a whole different environment. I need much less hubbub and noise, and I need quiet. So every teenage kid who ever said to me, why do I have to go to shul? Why can't I go to the top of a mountain and pray? I always say to them, let's go. Come on, you and me. We'll go to the top of a mountain and we'll meditate. We'll pray. And I meant it. And the kid saw that I meant it. He said, no, I'll go to shul. I was like, no, really, come on, we'll go to the beach. Come on. You know, my prayerful moments are on faraway places. Yours too, yeah? Yeah. 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 Well, see, the other problem I have, I don't know why we're getting so confessional here, but I'm a Litvak at heart. So I would much prefer to learn than to pray. I have my holy moments learning, right? Rather than pray. David Hartman is another one of my great teachers. So Hartman used to come to Shul Shabbos. It was the funniest thing in the world. He'd come to Shul Shabbos with a pile of books, just this huge pile of books. And he'd come and there was a table in the back of the shul in Jerusalem where we used to pray. And he'd sit down and he'd spread out these books. And then in the middle of prayers, like I feel this tapping on my shoulder. And I turn around and there's Hartman, a big guy. And he said, Ed, come here. So I come back with him. He says, look at this. Now read that. Now read this. Now look at this one. And he found a stira, in the Rashi, in the Rambam, He found a contradiction. And he was so excited to find an insight in the Torah, an insight in the text. That was his way of davening. Me too. If you see me sometimes in shul, I bring a book. I love Jackie Raffi. I love Cantor Fox. I love Cantor Barron. I love the way they daven. I really do. But I also like to learn. So that's my way of doing it. Other people like to take a walk in nature. We all find our different ways to daven, right? No one says the prayer book is the only way to daven. Yeah, Judy, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm schmoozing now, and I shouldn't do that. I'm in a room with Jews, so I'm schmoozing, right?
That's okay. My question is, do you think that the modern world, the creations of, or the inventions of so many things, have buried what I'm going to call intuition?
Oh, that's such a great question. Oh, my God.
And that the intuition is the ineffable.
All right, so you've asked such a brilliant question. So
Thank you.
there's a class of Jewish philosophers. There's also non-Jewish philosophers who fit this also, but I happen to be more familiar with the Jews, obviously, who came from Europe either right before the war or right afterwards. Buber, Heschel, Soloveitchik, Rosenzweig died in 1929, others, Berkowitz, others. And what they tend to do, the pattern of their thought, and I think this is German, is to see a duality. For Buber, it's I, it, and I, thou, right? For Soloveitchik, it's what he calls Adam 1 and Adam 2, majestic man and redemptive man, right? For Heschel, you'll see a couple of these, but for Heschel, it's normal rationality and the sense of the ineffable. Later, when we get into the book, The Sabbath, it's space consciousness and time consciousness, right? Other philosophers do similar kinds of things. And what they all try to say is, modern man privileges one way of knowing the world. I, it, in Buber. Space consciousness in Heschel, or normal rationality in Heschel. Adam 1, majestic technological man in Soloveitchik. And looks down upon the other side. Looks down on I, thou. Think it's foolish, it's undisciplined, it's unproductive, right? Looks down upon time consciousness because it interrupts productivity. Looks down upon the sense of the ineffable because it's irrational and mystical and superstitious. looks down upon redemptive man because it's a waste of time. It's not a real consciousness. It's a daydream. All modernity excludes that part of ourselves. And all of these thinkers come back and are saying to us, why do you think you walk around depressed all the time? Why do you think you have a sense that life has no meaning? Why do you think there is such a capacity for dehumanizing the other and inhumane behavior toward one another? Why do you think you're despoiling the planet and making it unlivable? Don't you think this has something to do with your mentality? And the reason is, all of these thinkers say, you've lost one significant part of your being. For Boobers, you've lost the capacity to sense the presence of an I-thou relationship, and so you live alienated, lonely lives. Right? For Soloveitchik, you lose redemptive man. You lose the capacity to cope with your own mortality. You lose the capacity to attach yourself to a meaning which transcends death, and you walk around depressed all the time or stoned all the time. You know how many cannabis stores there are now? For Heschel, you've lost the sense of the ineffable, which means you've lost your capacity to sense the holiness, the sacred, that which is intrinsically and infinitely valuable in life. And for all of them, this is both a problem of the internal life of losing meaning and the external life of losing ethics. That is the pattern of life of post-war 20th century, late 20th century Jewish, and this Christian thinker is much the same, but let's take the Jewish ones, Jewish thought. And intuition is one of the pieces of this. Exactly right. Preconceptual, pre-theological, pre-linguistic sense of the ineffable means it's sort of an intuitive insight. He uses the word insight. Instead of to use the word knowledge, he uses the word insight. Knowledge refers to I know facts. Insight refers to something that I realize in the course of my experience, right? So you'd use the word intuition, it's the same thing. And that's what he's trying to point to, you see? That's what he's pointing to. So all of these thinkers are making that same argument. And I got to tell you something, especially after this last week, it's a pretty compelling argument. You know, I'm really worried about the world I'm leaving my kids. You know, and the more I look at it, the more I'm beginning to think that these guys are right. It's not just a quirk of our politics. It has to do with something inside of us that's missing. And that's a very interesting insight. It's not out there, it's in here. And that's and then also, to quote my dear colleague, something in the way we do Judaism that's missing. Because we've gotten too hung up with, well, what he says, that article, Institution, Symbol, and Theology. We're too worried about belonging to, how many people belong to the shul, and getting the services on time and right, and saying the right thing about Israel, and forgetting about the inner life of the human being who is crying out for a sense of meaning. Yeah. 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 The way children are being raised. Yeah, take the microphone because there's people listening at home. The whole world wants to hear you, Jude. Come on.
Please not.
No, it's true.
But
Thousands of people all over the planet.
no, what I'm trying to say is that the genetic material that each one of us bring to the creation of the child is one thing.
Yeah.
Or two things. But then the child is born with its own DNA.
Right.
And parenting today, or slotting today, or careers today, or machinations of how the world needs you to be today, has obliterated that DNA individualism, and at the same time wants to fit them into some economic beneficial.
Well, yeah, I just had a conversation with a very, very dear friend of mine who has a beautiful child who's having trouble in school because he's a little peculiar. And I keep saying to her, the problem is, you know, it's what you just said. The problem is we try to stick the kid in a box instead of building the box around a kid. I said, there's nothing wrong with your kid. Your kid's perfectly delicious, a wonderful kid. Let's find a school program that can teach that kid instead of forcing the kid to like behave in a certain way because a certain school wants, I mean, you know. And she said, yeah, let's do that. So I'm trying to help this. I mean, I just love this kid. He's just such a great kid.
I deal with that
Yeah,
personally.
right,
I deal with my clients
right.
constantly of what has been done to them.
Yeah,
And the latest research from the authorities is, I should
Yeah.
say, that drug abuse, alcoholism, criminal behavior, all of that, much of that comes from abuse in infancy and childhood.
yeah.
It's very tricky.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
nobody pays
That's a
enough
whole nother
attention.
lecture. One night we're going to have a whole nother lecture
Right.
on what we do to our children, but that's another class. All right, let's do one more question because I want to get to Ben and Jerry's before it closes. So now that they're pro-Israel again, I can eat Ben and Jerry's. Go ahead.
Okay, if awe is the presence of God in this moment,
Yeah,
the here and now,
yeah,
and we have billions of galaxies,
yeah.
do we think of God then as a field of intelligence to be able to be everywhere?
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Mark. Let's put it this way. A religious person has an internal sensitivity and feels the presence of God. Okay? Right. Different people have different sensitivities, right? My wife happens to have an exquisite sense of taste. I hand her the spoon and say, taste the soup. She can say it needs a little more salt and a pinch of basil. Okay. And she's always right. She just has this whoosh, this sense, right? Certain people have perfect pitch in music. Certain people have wonderful eyes for design. Certain people have, you know, George is a wonderful mathematician, you know, because his mother was a wonderful mathematician. We have different intuitive senses that we're born with. A religious person has an intuitive sense, a sense for the presence of God all the time. And I really think there are people born that way, or they raised that way. Most of us are not. I'm not. Most of us are, you know, pretty normal about these things. And so he's trying to teach us how we can appropriate that sense, or at least get close to it. And what he's saying is, let me give you 3 things you all know about. Wonder, mystery, and awe. You all know you've had moments of wonder, of oh wow moments. You've all had moments of look at the starry night mystery. And you've all had moments of standing at the Grand Canyon and going, oh, wow. Or holding a grandchild. There's awe. And he says, these are the experiences that lead you to that sensitivity, that there's more in the world than just us. Right? That was, remember how we first started, right? The central thought is the living God. It is the perspective from which all other issues are seen. And the supreme problem is, what are the grounds for man's believing in the realness of God? Well, the grounds are I have these experiences and I come to understand, I come to sense that there's something happening around me that's bigger than just me. And that's what it is. Now, what that is, what's the essence of God, he's going to say, I couldn't tell you. You can use your imagination. Every religious person has done that and created metaphors for God. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Right? You ever read Moby Dick? God is the great ocean, right? On the other hand, what he can say is the Bible is going to come and tell us what the question is that God is asking us and how we need to respond. That's next lecture. What does the Bible tell us about God? And Heschel's going to come down and say that what the Bible tells us is God cares. God has a huge stake in human affairs. God cares about the homeless guy living under the bridge. God cares about the kid who's desperate at home alone with no one who understands his struggles. God cares about the woman trying to make it in this world against all of the odds that we place in front of women in this world. God cares. And mostly God cares about those that no one else cares about. And that's what the Bible's going to teach us. And the question is then what are we going to do to respond to that? And that's what religion's all about. Okay? I'll leave you with one last thought, because this is Heschel. So there's a wonderful thinker named Larry Kushner, who today lives in San Francisco, and he's a landscape painter, but once he was a terrific rabbi in Boston, in Sudbury. And he tells a wonderful story in one of his essays, one of his books. He says he was teaching a confirmation class at his shul, at his temple, Reformed temple. Confirmation is those kids who came back to learn after bar mitzvah, very rarefied group, right? And he asks these teenage kids, do you believe in God? And teenage kids all say, of course not. No one believes in God. And the rabbi's crestfallen, because these are the best kids in the temple. They're the ones that came back to learn with him in his class, and they come every week to learn with him. And the kids say, Rabbi, we love you, we love the temple, we just don't believe, no one believes in God, it's nonsense, you can't believe in God. So he trots out every proof for the existence of God there is. All these proofs, the cosmological proof, the teleological proof, and all the proofs of the existence of God. And at the end of the evening, the kids all say, that's really interesting, Rabbi, nobody believes in God today. And he goes home and he spends a week miserable, because even the best kids in my temple don't believe in God. Then he comes back the next week, and he asks them a different question. Who here has ever felt like the presence of God was near? And wouldn't you know it, every kid had an answer. One kid said, Friday night, my mother says lights candles, she says a blessing, she helps us, she remembers her father, or my grandfather, and I sort of feel like there's someone listening to her prayers. Another kid said, my grandfather died, we went to the cemetery, we stood at the grave, and I felt funny in some strange way, like there was something else going on. Another kid said, we went to Israel on a trip, and people got off the plane, got down and kissed the ground, and I saw that, and I said, something's going on here. Another kid said, my friend was sick in the hospital. We all went to go visit him. We filled up his room with balloons and toys, and he started to feel better, and I felt something was, and every single kid had an answer to the question. Ever feel the presence of God? What Heschel's going to say is that the experience, which is a preconceptual, prelinguistic, ineffable experience, now you know those words, is a source of insight to be taken seriously, even if we can't find the concepts and words to describe it. Because really, the most important things in life are preconceptual, prelinguistic. Why do you love your partner? Why do you love your kids? What do you feel when you stand in a forest? These experiences, Heschel would say, are filled with insight and possibility. Take them seriously. They lead you to an understanding that something in the world is being asked of you. What's being asked and how we're going to answer it, that's next week's lecture. Okay? Thank you all very much. Take care. Thank you, Ian. Everybody say thank you to Ian. Thank you, everybody online. Take care. Be gesund. Torah study, Shabbos, we're going to broadcast at 4 o'clock, but you can watch it anytime you want. Starting 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, anytime. This year, next year, me, Rabbi Gelman, Rabbi Hirsch, please join us. Shabbos morning, we have a scholar in residence, Professor Adler from Bar Ilan, and Nina's leading the Neshama Minyan, beautiful musical, spiritual, gorgeous minyan. Please support the Neshama Minyan. Come here, Professor Adler, next week, Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Cheer for UCLA. Their basketball team won. The football team, not so much. This week, we're playing dum, 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 da-dum, dum, da-dum. We're playing SC. We're playing SC.